Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. Today we are doing an open Q&A. The agenda is whatever you want to be talking about. We, as always, will shape this around questions from my patrons. I've got some about House of the Dragon. I've got some about A Song of Ice and Fire more broadly. I've got some about Lord of the Rings. That's roughly the order that we're going to be going through. But yeah, let's get straight into it. I'll try and pick up as much as I can from from the chat as we're going through. But let's start with a question from Diego Godoys. Hola. Hola, Robert. In the latest House of the Dragon episode, episode 2, I missed any mention of the current heir of the Blacks. Do you think in the next episode she will call her supporting Rhaenyra will call her supporting members like Mysaria and young Joffrey to court? So I've said before on here, let's get the spoiler warnings out of the way. Book spoilers, absolutely fine. The books have been out for ages. Show spoilers, once the show is out, I will happily talk about the show. Episode 2 obviously came out over the weekend, so very happy to talk about that. I am getting the episodes a little bit in advance, which is very exciting. And I just watched episode 3, so I won't give any spoilers from episode 3. Other than to say, I kind of liked the episode, I have to say. But I don't think that it is a spoiler. It's in the trailer that Mysaria is there in court in episode 3. So that's not a spoiler. What I will talk about, though, is and Joffrey in the show. Joffrey, incidentally, he was one of, if you remember, they sent the young members of Team Black up to the Vale. The Vale has got actually increased in importance in the TV show, it has to be said. But they've gone up there. So that's where they sent Joffrey. And then where I would go with this, I think it's quite important to just keep a track of who the heir is here, because there's another element to what's going on, not just who will take over after Rhaenyra, because that was Jace. Viserys obviously died before that, which means that her new heir is Joffrey, who is young, and I think he's canonically 6 or something like that. So he's still quite young. In the books, he stays with her. He comes to King's Landing, and he book spoilers, but he has a heroic but tragic end during the storming of the Dragon Pit, which means that then her new heir is her son Aegon. So her heir is getting younger and younger and younger. Actually, I think it's Aegon who's 6. Apologies, I think Joffrey's just a little bit older than that. So, what is the importance of all of this? Well, if you remember, if we take the Song of Ice and Fire, this foundational prophecy that we've got here for the Targaryens that they've played a huge amount on in House of the Dragon, which has sort of got the thumbs up from George R. R. Martin. Let's not forget, right at the very beginning, we've not had him sort of explaining in detail the differences between the book and the show on this one, but we were told when all was well between the showrunner and George R. R. Martin, we were told George R. R. Martin gave the thumbs up to this idea. So where they went with this on the show was that this was something which was passed down from ruler to heir. And we saw in the very first episode, we saw Viserys telling Rhaenyra. Now, Daemon, small plot point a bit later, gets a bit annoyed that he hadn't been told this and Rhaenyra had, because he was so close to his brother. So when she then becomes queen, in her mind, obviously we've got Aegon, who's in his mind being king, but while she's still on Dragonstone, we're wondering, okay, is she going to tell Jacaerys? There's no indication that she did on the TV show. But then is she going to tell Joffrey? And after he dies, is she going to tell Aegon. Is this a point at which this gets lost? Because in the books, Rhaenyra and Daemon both die, which means that if they are the only people who know this prophecy, where's it going to go? It's one to keep an eye on because they have played up the importance of this prophecy. Even in episode 2, they were playing up the importance of this prophecy. That was the thing. Don't forget that Daemon, when he went to Rhaenyra and she was there on her bed, just understandably distraught about what had happened to the loss of her son. And the thing which he says, which gets her up and moving, is reminding her of this Song of Ice and Fire. So the showrunners want us to know this is still important in this plot. Is she going to be telling her heir at some point? Or is that information going to get lost? So that's first question from Diego. Then Jay saying, "Hi, Robert. Been a minute. Hi there. Based on what we've seen in House of the Dragon so far, do we have a sense of whether they're subtly privileging one of the historical sources more than the others from Fire and Blood sections on the dance? Are there any broader implications to this? So far, it seems like an interesting balance that combines and subverts each source, but I haven't thought deeply about it." Yeah, I think you're right. I've not done a full analysis of this, I have to say, and I've not seen anyone else who've done a full analysis of this. But the general feel is that they've kind of taken their pick from different sources within Fire and Blood. But the bigger difference is the things that they've gone off on a different approach completely. Now, if you're wondering what I mean by all of this, so in Fire and Blood is not just written as a clear historical narrative, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. It's written as an in-world history book where the in-world historian is quoting various sources, eyewitness accounts. Now, during this period of time, then he has 3 key eyewitness accounts. He's got Septon Eustace, Grand Maester Munken, and Mushroom. Now, they each play a subtly different role in Fire and Blood, as in the bits of information they have are different bits of information, and we should treat them slightly differently. So the narratives that we seem to be getting from Munken are attempts to be this erudite history, trying to show, oh, well, that couldn't possibly have happened because of these erudite and clever reasons. And then Septon Eustace often has as you might expect, a slightly more moralistic approach to these kinds of things. Mushroom, as a court fool, he's just he loves the scandal. And he will come out. His version of events tends to be the most lurid and the most exciting and interesting because he was writing a bestseller book, basically. So we get these 3 different accounts. Now, they have used elements of all of these in the 2 and bit seasons we've had so far, but the biggest changes have been when they've gone in a slightly different route. Now, sometimes that is completely nothing that's there in the text. There's no hint of it. Sometimes you can see this as one of another possible way of interpreting what was going on. And I'll give you an example. If you remember episode 1 of season 3, Jace dies, and you'll remember that he's flying there, Vermax, and pulls out. He sees this is Rhaena on Sheepstealer. He pulls out from about to attack that dragon, has to swoop down. Sheepstealer comes and starts chasing him. He gets too low. Then you get that kind of harpoon rope thing, which drags his dragon down into the water. He manages to escape, and then he gets shot. So that's what we see. Now, this is how that is described in Fire and Blood. Several differing tales were told afterward of how and why the dragon fell. Some claimed a crossbowman put an iron bolt through his eye. But this version seems suspiciously similar to the way Meraxes met her end long ago in Dawn. Another account tells us that a sailor in the crow's nest of a Meerish galley cast a grapnel as Vermax was swooping through the fleet. One of its prongs found purchase between two scales and was driven deep by the dragon's own considerable speed. The sailor had coiled his end of the chain about the mast, and the weight of the ship and the power of Vermax's wings tore a long, jagged gash in the dragon's belly. Now, there's two different options there. Sometimes they give us even more different options. And what happened on the TV show, some resemblance to that. It's not exactly that, but the way that this is presented is like we get different reports. So the way that he died there could have happened. So I think the answer to your question is that no, none of the three main sources that we have within Fire and Blood have been particularly given preference. But what they are trying to do is weave a narrative through that sometimes touches on them, but is their own version of what actually happened. So the bigger changes are the changes that just don't fit any of the things that we're told. So the meeting between Rhaenyra and Alicent being the person who's opening up the gates to the Red Keep, that's all completely show stuff. There's not even a hint that that was what was happening in Fire and Blood. That is them moving away from the source material. Sometimes things are quite close to the source, like the Jace example. It's similar-ish, but sometimes, like Alicent there, or indeed adjacent to the Jace thing, adjacent, then you get Sheepstealer and Rhaena, which is, again, a clear change. There's no nettles on the show. So I hope that kind of explains how they're approaching this. And I think trying to sort of dig into which of the different sources within Fire and Blood is given preference, we could do that, but I think that misses the bigger picture of the things that they're doing that are completely different from what's on the show or what's in the book. Let's go to a question from Orion's Orcas, saying, this is probably the stupidest question ever. There's no stupid questions, do not worry. Can't get it out of my head since season 3, episode 2 of House of the Dragon. Do you think it might be possible that the White Walkers started south after all the dragons were dead and magic was diminished? They were moving south long before Dany's dragons were born. Isn't that correct, or am I totally off in the sequence of events? All love to the moderators. Well, moderators, yes, let's take this as an opportunity. If you are watching this live on YouTube, coming soon on Facebook as well, hello if you're there on Facebook, I see you. Then in the live chat, we've got some fantastic moderators who keep the place free from all of the bots and the trolls and just keep the conversation flowing. So moderators, thank you. You are amazing. If you are there in the chat, show them a bit of love because they definitely deserve it. And while I'm doing a quick pause, patrons, thank you. I cannot do what I do without your support. It means huge amounts to me. So thank you. That's why I answer these questions in these live streams. It's one of the benefits of being a patron is you get your questions definitely answered on the live streams. Patreon is still the best way to support this channel. If you wish to do so, there is a link somewhere. And thank you. Right, anyway, back to the question. Did the White Walkers or the others start moving south after the death of the dragons? Well, in terms of timing, you were wondering about the timings. So the events of A Song of Ice and Fire happen roughly 300 AC. So some of them happen a year or two before that, but it's easier to remember about 300 AC. The events of the Dance of the Dragons happen around the year 130 AC, AC being after the conquest. So that's year 1 is the year of Aegon's, well, technically it's the year of Aegon's coronation rather than his actual conquest, but that's years after the conquest. So that's then 170 years before the time of A Song of Ice and Fire, before Dany's eggs hatch. The dragons, after the Dance of the Dragons, we started with 20 dragons. I did a video on this a little while ago, which called something like "Which Dragons Survived the Dance of the Dragons?" But we started the Dance of the Dragons with, we think, 20 live dragons. At the end of it, 3 of those 20 survived, and 1 new one had been born, called Morning, who was ridden by Rhaena in the book. But the assumption has to be, this is one of the toxic butterflies that I suspect George R. R. Martin was concerned about, is that if Rhaena is riding Sheepstealer, then she won't be riding Morning, which means, are you writing Morning out of it? It's beyond the scope of House of the Dragons, and maybe they don't care about the implications for after they finish telling their story. But it's a hugely important moment in terms of dragons in Westeros, because Morning was the first new dragon after all of these dragon deaths, and the 3 that survived, they weren't under control of House Targaryen, let's put it that way. You had the Sheepstealer, who Nettles had down, and they were hiding out in the Mountains of the Moon in the Vale of Arryn. There was Silverwing, who was on an island in Red Lake, which is basically sort of down, I think it's the North Reach, just near the Westerlands. She, as far as we can tell, just stayed there for the rest of her life. And then we have Cannibal, who was a wild dragon living on Dragonstone, who nobody could get close to. Now, none of those were in House Targaryen's control until Morning appears, this new young dragon, very exciting, being ridden by Rhaena. However, within about 20 years, all of the dragons were gone. We do not yet know how. All we know is that in the year 153, the last dragon happened. And I think I did a video on that as well recently. The last dragon died. And the last dragon was this poor, small, stunted dragon, never ridden, never, as far as we can tell, never even given a name. But so we're then looking, if you've got our kind of timescales in our mind, roughly the year 130-ish is the Dance of the Dragons, 150-ish, 153 is the last dragon, and then A Song of Ice and Fire is in the year 300. So if and at some point we know that the others did start to move south, is it likely to be caused by the death of the dragons? Possibly, but that does seem quite early. Now, the logic that you set out, I would completely agree with, which is that dragons bring with them, or if there are dragons in the world, there is more magic in the world. And we see this at both ends, actually. When you get the Dany's dragons hatching, the magic users of the world find things easier to do. We get reports of a fire mage in Karth who used to be pretty rubbish, but then suddenly he's making these fire ladders and disappearing up them into the sky, and the glass candles start working again. The pyromancers, the alchemists guild in King's Landing, they go to Tyrion and they say, strange question, but are there any dragons around? Because suddenly we're finding this a whole lot easier, and our lore tells us that can only be because there's dragons. So when the dragons come back, the ambient level of magic goes up. When the dragons disappeared, we haven't got a full account of this, but we've got a kind of like a passing reference. This is from Sir Arlen of Pennytree, of all people, who says that after the last dragon died, then the summers got shorter and the winters got colder, along those lines. And Dunk doesn't really think too much about this, but there's no reason to doubt Sir Arlen here. So clearly there's some association between dragons being there and the amount of magic there is in the world. So perhaps that woke them up again, the others. Perhaps that was the spark which brought them back. And then over the course of the next century or so, they slowly built themselves up and moved further south. In terms of when we know that they were moving, I think the earliest reasonably sure sign that we have is when we get Craster, who is offering up his sacrifices to these cold gods. And you can do a little, it's not a very nice calculation to make, but based upon his wives and daughters, you can work out that he probably started doing that maybe 40 years ago, something along those lines. So that's when they kind of reached down into the haunted forest. So I think the answer is possibly, but as long as we're assuming that they didn't immediately charge south the moment that they got sort of woken up or prompted into action or whatever it is, which kind of makes sense. We don't know huge amounts about the others. George R. R. Martin has not given us huge amounts in the books, not given us huge amounts of information about them, but they do appear to be very slow and deliberate in their approach. So yeah, the story does track that perhaps with the dragons dying out, and this is not just in Westeros, remember, those were the only dragons in the world. With the dragons dying out, then they slowly started moving in the very, very far north, and then maybe give it a few decades, they moved down towards like skirling past the stuff at the very far north. Another few decades, they move a bit further south. So maybe that's what we're looking at here. Commander Ray, new member. Fantastic, thank you very much. Yes, if you would like to support the channel, but for whatever reason you don't want to go onto Patreon, if you're here on YouTube, you can become a channel member. And what that means is that you get nicely highlighted there in the chat for me, and I will be more likely to spot you as you go by. Lorelei's asking about posting the Discord link. Yes, so Lorelei has several people have over the years tried to persuade me to set up a Discord for Indie Geek, and I completely agree I should do. I haven't. Thank you so much for the people who've gone to the efforts to do this. It's just my technical inability to do things, which has held me back. But Lorelei, thank you so much, has set one up. I'm very happy to sort of give that my blessing as an unofficial place that I will, when I can find it, go in and sort of let people know stuff that's going on. Could somebody put a link down, not just in the live chat, but down in the comments, so that people know where that is, and then we'll try and figure it out from there. So thank you very much. Okay, let's have a quick flick through the chat. Carl Karsnark saying there has to be some funky George R. R. Martin linguistic connection between Stark and Craster, which is basically Starker if you play with the letters a bit. Yeah, maybe. So George R. R. Martin does love this little kind of wordplay thing. He does. I mean, I'll throw my favorite. I've used this example several times. My favorite one of these is you get Catelyn Stark's two daughters, Sansa and Arya. The names that they use undercover, as it were, the most for the longest periods are Cat of the Canals and Elaine. So Catelyn's daughters are Cat and Elaine, which I think is wonderful. That's not a coincidence. He deliberately wanted to do that. Yeah, he does do this kind of thing. Whether the Stark and Craster link is, I mean, I have a lot of time for these kinds of thoughts, but I'm I think I'd need a bit more convincing on that one, I have to say. Patriot for Peace, saying, do you think it is fire magic that returns with the magic, and ice magic is more associated with the others? Yes, in as much as it is, fire magic is the thing that we see the most when I talk about the ambient level of magic in the world going up. It does seem to be fire magic that seems to be the thing that seems to benefit the most. But this is, and I keep on saying this, at some point I will do my grand overarching theory of how magic works in George R. Martin's world. I don't think that these things are in as much silos as we sometimes imagine that they are. There is, and I should also say, when I talk about the ambient level of magic, dragons are not controlling completely. It's not like an on-off switch. Magic still happened without the dragons. It was just at a lower level. There were still, you can pick 101 examples of magical things that happened while there were no dragons in the world. It's just that they kind of went up a notch. So yes, I think it most affects the kind of the more fire type things, absolutely, but I don't think it's just fire. The bit that I'm intrigued by, because we don't know, is whether the kind of the return of the others does do something to make ice magic more powerful. Who knows? Let's go to where were we at? Cathrine Furseth, saying, hi, Robert. House of the Dragon has definitely added several layers to and details of the figure of Alice Rivers. What do you make of them? In the books, she is a great enigma with regards to her allegiance and role during the dance, and after it's over, she becomes the Witch Queen of Harrenhal, with a son she claims is Aemond's. In your mind, what have we learned from the show version, and to what extent is this consistent with George R. R. Martin's version of Alice? Side note, how cool was Daemon and Rhaenyra's entrance into the Red Keep? Putting all discussions and differences between show and book aside, we're entitled to enjoy badass moments like that. Well, on that second point, I am completely of the opinion that if you find something cool in an adaptation onto the screen, then great, enjoy it. The big, this is the world's most obvious point, but the big upgrade you get from book to screen is the visuals, and you can make the visuals look absolutely amazing. And I think that you can admire the visuals in things that, even if you don't like some other elements of it. One problem I think we often find within fandoms is this desire to say something's either brilliant or terrible, whereas in reality, within most TV shows, say there are some brilliant things and some terrible things and quite a lot of things in the middle, and let's praise the things that are good. So that's a bit of an aside, but Alice Rivers. Yeah, I've got a video coming out, I think next week, on Alice Rivers. That's going to be another one of the collaborations I do with History of Westeros. I think there's two big things I would draw out from what the show are doing with this, because you're right, they have expanded her role really quite significantly, particularly with Daemon in the books. Then Daemon seems, I can't remember the exact phrase they used, but Daemon seemed impervious, or he seemed to be able to ignore whatever charms she had. It's when Aemond arrives that that's when things happen. Now, obviously, on the show, Daemon spent most of season 2 on his kind of like Vision Quest thing with her, and so clearly was affected by her. He may not have found her attractive, or that they may not have become lovers, as it's certainly in the books she does with Aemond, but there was a connection there. So they beefed up her role. And I think the two things that I would highlight. The first one is the breadth of types of magic. Now, this is a thing that we were sort of touching on just a moment ago, but we have come to understand that you're not necessarily stuck in doing just one type of magic in the world of Ice and Fire. It's possible that you can be good at more than one type of magic. Clearly, Melisandre is good at the Valor stuff, seeing visions in the flames and things like that. But also, she's a shadowbinder. She's a shadowmancer. She can make the shadow babies. That's not from R'hllor. That's stuff that she learned when she was over in Asshai. Similarly, we get Bloodraven, classic example. He seems very much to be using the old gods kind of magic, the Green Seer stuff, and also the Targaryen-y side of things. Mirri Maz Duur, healing magic, and also the shadow magic. So there's lots of these characters who seem to be able to do more than one type of magic. The thing that we have with Alice Rivers is the huge range that she can do, which seems, I think, is probably the widest range out of any magic user that we know, because she seems to be able to see visions in the flames, but also in the clouds and things like that. She in the books, then she certainly does, or is attributed to her, bits of magic that we've not seen anywhere else, making people's heads explode, being able to kind of throttle someone from afar. She's clearly on the TV show, they've upped the emphasis on the weirwood stuff. She can show Daemon how to access the weirwood network, giving him these kind of green dreams, maybe even, we don't know whether it was her or whether it was Helena, but there was a kind of link up between dragon dreams and the green dreams or the weirwood visions. There's more than a hint on the show. Do you remember she had that barn owl, that she was also a skin changer? So the amount of different types of magic that she uses, she's also deeply connected with Aemond. She has a dragon later. There's so many different types of magic going on. We're told that she looks a lot younger than she should do, this kind of age-defying magic, which we read about a lot. There's many more examples. The variety is huge. So I think that's the first thing, and they ramped that up even more in House of the Dragon. The second thing is that although she has that breadth, it's very clear that she is personally very strongly tied in with Harrenhal and the Weirwood Network, because she's seen there with the Green Men, which is astonishing. We'd never seen the Green Men on screen before. They're still a huge mystery. Again, I did a recent video on them. It's still a huge mystery as to exactly what they are. But being able to access the weirwood visions, being able to seemingly either see or influence the green dreams that somebody gets, she's clearly very associated with that, to the extent that when this is episode 2 stuff, when she tells Daemon what she wants to rule Harrenhal, you're tempted to wonder whether Daemon interprets this as she just wants the power, she just wants to be Lady of Harrenhal. Maybe it's because she wants to reclaim Harrenhal. Maybe, as we see visually, Harrenhal is incredibly tied in with the Weirwood Network. As you go along, if you look next time you're looking at it when they're wandering the corridors, you see the roots are literally moving in and out along the floor and the walls, as if the Weirwood tree was trying to reclaim that ground, because there were many weirwood trees there. It's on the shores of the God's Eye Lake. So that's the second thing I have noticed with House of the Dragon, is that they have potentially given her this role as being the the person who is there to help Harrenhal reclaim itself from the curse, from the castle, and bring it back under the aegis of the Children of the Forest and the Weirwoods. Let's have a quick flick through the chat. And where are we at? I'm just saying, Lorelei saying I have to duck out early due to a migraine. Going to try and stay for your question. Trying to know where your question got to. It's here somewhere. Let's see if I can find it. I'll see whether I can do it now. No, I have to admit I can't find that. Maybe. Right, I'm sorry, I can't find that immediately. If you, if I can't find it at all, I will answer it over on Patreon for you. So don't hang around because it won't be immediately. But apologies for that. Let's go to a question from where are we at? Oh, there's more sort of broader A Song of Ice and Fire questions. Dustin Wilson saying, "Hey Robert, do you think that the old Storm King, Durrandon, is just a straightforward reference to the band Duran Duran?" The thought makes me laugh. Well, I wouldn't put it past George R. R. Martin. Let's put it that way. He does put a lot of references, homages in his writing. So, and sometimes they are music related. He is a fan of the Grateful Dead. In fact, there was the Weirwoods. In fact, are apparently part inspired by one of the members of the Grateful Dead called, I think, Bob Weir. I'm not a Deadhead myself, but George R. Martin is. So he definitely does put nods in there to that. As for Duran Duran, I don't know. It doesn't feel like the kind of music that he's into. But Duran Duran, incidentally, their name is itself, that's a nod to science fiction character. And I've not seen the film, but Barbarella, which I think is like a 1970s film, and there was a character in that called Dr. Durand, and apparently the members of Duran Duran, when they were forming themselves, really liked this, and so called themselves Duran Duran. Yeah, I don't. As I say, I've not seen the film, but apparently, I just noted it down. Apparently, in the film, he invented the excessive pleasure weapon, which makes me wonder what sort of 1970s film this was. But feel free to let me know in the chat. Family-friendly show. Let's go to a question from Mark. Were Daenerys' dragons bigger in the TV show compared to the books? I've been reading up on her dragons. Is Dreamfire presumed to be their mother? Viserion was the smallest and the most gentle. He represented the relationship she wished she had with Viserys. She was very proud of Rhaegal as he was representing her family's name, and she was proud of her older brother Rhaegar. Drogon was her favourite, and they bonded. He seemed to represent her power and ferocity, especially in war. For me, Viserion was my favourite, and then Rhaegal. Okay, so what's going on there? Well, yes, so Drogon was obviously named after Khal Drogo. Are they well, first of all, the Dreamfire thing, I think there has been some speculation when we're not told exactly with those three dragon eggs where they came from. I'm sure I've done videos on this in the past, but I'm reasonably certain that these were the three that the Sea Lord of Braavos kept hold of for a very long time. And could they be Dreamfires? Speculation has been that they are. I think that they basically confirmed this when they were handing every. Remember when they put the younglings, the young members of Team Black, sent them up to the Vale. Then they sent some dragon eggs there as well, which I think they said were Dreamfires. So that's where that comes from. But that none of that is canon. In terms of the size, we can talk about this a bit. The answer is yes. On the show, they are way bigger, and again, this is for the visuals as much as anything else. Danny's dragons are very young, so when we're talking about them, they're a year old, couple of years old. By the time Danny's invasion happens, they might be 3, conceivably 4. They're not old dragons. Now, this is an issue for George R. R. Martin in terms of pacing of the story, and we've often talked about this 5-year gap that he was writing towards this plan to have a 5-year gap in the story. And when you read the books, you can see where it is, because he puts all of his main characters in places where they could conceivably stay for 5 years and learn and grow. Arya could stay with the Faceless Men for 5 years. Sansa could stay in the Vale for 5 years. Bran could stay with Bloodraven for 5 years, and so on. You can see the different characters. They go to a place where they can learn and grow and be there for 5 years, because those in the books, all of those characters are much younger, and he wanted for the second half of his story for them to be aged up a bit. But there's also an issue with the dragons, because the dragons are very young, and he was wanting, when they get to the invasion, for them to be much more grown. So the size they are at in the books is, I just noted down what we've got. So Drogon is the largest. At the point at which we most recently see him, he flies off when Danny climbs onto his back. He's got a 20-foot wingspan, which is significant. That's give or take 6-7 meters, something like that. And his body is the size of a large horse, we're told. So it's rideable, but only just. So if you compare that to, and again, I had to note down the exact thing, on the TV show, we're looking at maybe 150 feet wingspan. That's 50 meters-ish, which is huge. So the size of like a commercial jet, really. So there's a huge discrepancy. Now, this is something that George R. Martin will have to work through, because yes, you can have Drogon can grow a bit more over the next year, and would still be fearsome, even as a relatively small dragon. As the only dragons out there, they would all be very hard to kill and able to do huge amounts of damage. But the question I often ask myself in connection with this is, will George R. R. Martin come up with some reason, some way that they can grow extra fast? Because we know roughly how fast dragons go, because we've seen in like Fire and Blood how long it was until morning grew to a certain size, and what sizes different dragons were at different points of time. He will have to have these dragons growing very quickly. Now, it may well be that he decides that the other 2 dragons, Viserion and Rhaegal, they are currently flying above. There's a war going on, Siege of Meereen, and as a part of that, we get these catapults that are hurling bodies into the air into the city, and the dragons are just flying around and catching these bodies midair, and having them as kind of like food. And then obviously there's a whole load of dead bodies on the floor, and they're just flaming them and eating them. So perhaps George R. Martin will say, well, dragons grow as far, if they have an unlimited supply of food, they can grow at an unlimited rate. So perhaps they will grow very quickly. I don't know. I suspect he'll find some reason, because otherwise Dany's invasion won't be quite as impressive. If she's there on a dragon which is still big and impressive, but not anywhere near the size of what we have on the TV show, then yeah, it's a little bit more underwhelming. People saying I love Barbarella. Good. As I said, I've not seen a Greek weirwood. Hungry like the wolf, hungry like the dire wolf. Absolutely. Weir and Hart are both from the Grateful Dead. Well, there we go. I've seen Derry's read it before, saying I've seen Barbarella played by Jane Fonda. I'm learning a lot here. And Carl Karsnark saying it is peak camp and kitsch. Okay. And the Eyes of Sin saying it was a film. It was certainly a film. And raunchy. Okay, I'm getting that vibe. Okay, anyway, thank you. I've learned a lot more about Barbarella than I knew at the beginning of today. I have to say, I saw the question, and yeah, I didn't know about the excessive pleasure weapon or whatever it was. I probably don't want to know any more about that. Let's go to a question. Ariel Winchester, hi there. Question sent on Patreon, just sending some extra love for my favorite YouTube creator, Dracaris. Well, thank you very much. Yes, actually, I think your question's coming up next. I love it. This is a perfect segue. My next question is from Ariel Winchester, saying, hello, Robert. I hope all is well across the pond for you and Dan the dog. It is. Thank you. One of my favorite quotes from the books is, a dragon is not a slave. I think it expresses the individuality, character, and uniqueness of dragons. These are not just beasts meant to be controlled, but magical creatures dominated by something more. I do like the examples so far in the books with Drogon, Silverwing, and a Balerion, as well as now House of the Dragon, as how House of the Dragon is portraying this concept. Do you think we will see more of this in the books going forward with Viserion and Rhaegal, or even in the next Fire and Blood book? And how will Dragonbinder impact on it? So, yeah, there's a lot in there. A dragon is not a slave is a really interesting kind of concept that everybody is trying to treat them. We see this again and again through the books, is people try and treat them as I want control of the dragon. And this is the whole point when Dany is freeing the Unsullied, the master thinks that if you hand over the dragon, it's now his. He's now in control. He's not in control of the dragon. The dragon decides for itself who it wishes to sort of bond with and obey. And it's no random coincidence that we learn that about dragons at the point at which Dany is freeing slaves, because she's giving this freedom. And then when she climbs on board Drogon and flies with Drogon, she has no control over him. In fact, she thinks, and I think this will come up again in the books, she thinks to herself, because she can't control Drogon, Drogon flies and then stops, and she nudges it, climbs on it, says, come on, let's go. Nothing seems to be working. And she thinks to herself, I'm sure I've heard or read, or someone told me once that the old Valyrians used to control dragons with magic horns and things like that. Now, we're immediately supposed to think, oh, Dragonbinder's over there. So this is one of those bits of lost lore. If anyone knows this, it will be Tyrion, incidentally. He has read every book he can get his hands on dragon lore. And he is obviously going to Meereen, and he will obviously at some point reach Dany. One thing House of the Dragon, I think, did really well with the dragons was to add, without giving us huge amounts of extra sort of exposition, just allowing us to see some bits of dragon lore. Like, for example, the saddles and the chains and how the dragon rider would sort of get on it, because Dany literally is just climbing on top of a dragon and hanging on for dear life. That's not how they used to. They had the saddles and things. I think it's entirely likely Tyrion will design a saddle for Drogon, for Dany to sit on Drogon. So this is something which is there, and she will be wondering, how do I control the dragon? And probably Tyrion will be able to say to her, you can't control a dragon. That's not how it works. But you bond, and the dragon will go along with what you want if you're kind of simpatico. We don't know all of the details of exactly how that works, but it's very clear that there are some in House of the Dragon. There are some dragon rider to dragon combos that they seem to work them fine. Daemon and Caraxes, they seem to understand each other, and Caraxes does what Daemon says. But in other occasions, with other dragons, they don't. House of the Dragon, I think, has done well to show that, and they've reiterated this idea through Viserys, who says something similar, I think, about dragons not being slaves. So where are they going to go with this? I think is the question. I think they were going to go with it by the use of Dragonbinder, showing that somebody can try and control a dragon. Euron, I think, in this instance. However, if you're wanting, they will be constantly fighting against that, and what you're actually wanting is you're wanting to be creating this strong bond between a dragon and a rider. In House of the Dragon, will we see more instances of dragons not doing what their riders say? Possibly. So when does it happen in House of the Dragon? Now, it seems to happen when you get a rider who's relatively new to a dragon, if they've not formed the strong bond. Perhaps if the dragon, like Sheepstealer, is used to being independent and is not used to, hasn't been sort of trained for this. And also in the heat of battle, the three dragons we've seen that have sort of gone off script, as it were, that was always during a battle of some kind. So what we're looking for are inexperienced riders, potentially on dragons that haven't really been ridden much before, in battles. I think the most logical place for this to happen is Tumbleton. In books, then there's this massive battle, a three-way dragon battle happens at Tumbleton, and Tumbleton is basically just chaos. Everybody loses control. Nobody's in charge of the battle. It's just the horrors of war. So I do wonder whether they will play it that at least one of the dragon riders, because Ulf and Hugh have only just managed to get on their dragons, and they're there. We've not seen them really in combat yet. They've flown them because they were in the Battle of the Gullet in the books, but they didn't do anything there. They've flown over to the God's Eye Lake and back. They've flown with Damon and Rhaenyra to King's Landing, but there was no real big battle there. So when they do get into a battle, are they going to be able to control their dragons? I think it's a fair chance that they aren't. The one thing I'm most intrigued by is what happens in the battle over the God's Eye Lake. Daemon on Conaxes, Aemond on Vhagar. We've already seen that Aemond on Vhagar can't always control his dragon. So is that going to play into this? In the books, it's very clear that this is just a Daemon tactical masterstroke. He goes up into the sun, comes down, a classic dragon move, comes down and just crashes down into Vhagar, and he is jumping out with his sword at the ready in order to be killing Aemond. And it's yes, it's basically it was a he was not expecting to survive it, and I don't think he did survive it. But he caught. It was intentional, but he caught Aemond and Vhagar by surprise. Given the amount of times this show has deliberately showed key moments to be taking away from that volition and more towards accidents and misunderstandings, it would not surprise me if in moments like that it is some sort of a misunderstanding or lack of control on somebody's part. Martin S. Hi there, Martin, saying, hello, Robert. I would just like to say I really liked episode 3.2 of House of the Dragon, especially the latter half. To me, the best episode from any show in quite some time. Oh, big praise. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought it worked really well, and it was supposed to be the finale to season 2. And I think the way that they played the taking of King's Landing, given the setup that they'd given themselves, I thought that worked really well. I loved seeing Daemon and Rhaenyra going in. It was foolhardy, but just the two of them going in to potentially take on everyone in the Red Keep was pretty amazing. And I thought that the scene, I keep on saying it, but I think that scene when Rhaenyra finally ascends the Iron Throne and you get the mirror image of her through the pool of blood, her just kind of shrinking down under the weight of everything that's happened. There's echoes of her father ascending the Iron Throne in his last day. There's a lot going on there. I thought it was excellent acting, and I thought it looked amazing. The 4 dragons flying down to King's Landing, fantastic. So yeah, I would agree. It was visually spectacular, and I think it held together in its own sort of internal logic. And there was no, whereas episode 1, it veered off very clearly in a number of ways, particularly in who was at the Battle of the Gullet and what happened and things like that. This, it wasn't, there wasn't anything. So, well, there are obviously some things, but the major items were not anti-canon so much as the following it where the butterflies led, if that's not too much nuance. Just a quick flick through the chat. Jevro's saying dragons have proven to be very intelligent by themselves. They could just go hench on the dragon keepers, but don't. Yes, so George R. R. Martin has said, just by the way, in terms of dragon intelligence, he said that they have got the intelligence of a very intelligent dog. So I think if you've ever come across like sheepdogs and things like that, the ones that are just really clever, who understand orders. They need to be entertained because their minds are working so quickly. That's the kind of level, or like a notch above that. Dragons are not clever in the way that humans are clever. They have got the sort of the animal cleverness, which incidentally, as we cover Tolkien here as well, makes them very different from Tolkien's dragons. Tolkien's dragons are very clever, cleverer than human clever. So these are different conceptions of what a dragon is like. Brian Velko talking about the Otto Hightower. Yeah, so I mean, this is one of the things that so I think Lisa Vance was excellent as Otto Hightower. I thought he was one of the standout members of the cast. I think that the way that it felt a little bit disjointed with him just appearing for a few seconds in episode 2 is because it is one of the victims of this not being the season finale. Because this is just like, oh, and here's Otto in episode 2, just felt like, oh, okay, so he's been there all along. Whereas if we had him at the end of season 2, we saw him at the beginning of season 2, and he basically got sent away, or he went away down to we thought down to Old Town, and then we should be starting to think, well, hang on a moment, where is he? Because and they could probably have woven this into a few, because if we've got Ormond here with this army, is Otto not there? So I think this was a victim of that. There were a number of victims of that. I think the good news is that we now can start on a new series of arcs, character arcs, in the real start of season 3. Pardon me, the real start of season 3, which is episode 3. Let's go to Sir Friend saying, Happy Thursday, Robert, and to you too. I hope you've recovered from the stressful 90 minutes yesterday evening. Yeah, it was the England game we against Democratic Republic of Congo, and we were losing for a very long time until the mighty Harry Kane stepped up. So, yeah, but it was a little bit late and the nerves were jangling a little bit. Onwards to the quarterfinals. Will Stone Snake appear again in the books? Not a huge mystery that George R. R. Martin has left hanging, but an interesting one. Best wishes, warmest regards. And to you. Okay, so I actually get this asked quite a lot. The extent to which it makes me think, would people like a video on this? Because I'm very happy to talk about this. It is, as you say, it's not a massive mystery that George R. R. Martin has set up, but it is a mystery. It's a question that's left hanging, and it's referenced a couple of times. Stone Snake is a member of the Night's Watch, and he was stationed at the Shadow Tower, and he came with the 200, I think it was, members of the Night's Watch who joined up with Joe Mormont's main force north of the Wall when they're on that great ranging. And so they all merge together and they end up at the Fist of the First Men. And Joe Mormont basically says, right, we're setting up camp here. But he sends a small group out to do a little bit of scouting to see what's going on in the Skirling Pass. And that small group is led by Corin Halfhand, and it includes Jon Snow and also Stone Snake. Now, we don't know all of the history of Stone Snake. We get description. He's quite a wiry guy. He's an experienced member of the Night's Watch. And Jon thinks of him as being the best climber that he knows. So that's the detail we have. That small scouting group, they run into the the Wildling main, or close to the Wildling main encampment, and then are trying to get away and escape. And the horse that a stone snake has gets killed. I think. I think by anyway, it doesn't matter. He gets killed. Well, whatever it is, and Coleen decides that he's going to send him off because they think they're about to get caught. He's going to send Stone Snake off to go straight back to report back to the Fist of the First Men and the Lord Commander. And so the main scouting group head off. Stone Snake starts climbing the mountain. And we get told this. This is the quote that we get from Corin Halfhand, who's no fool. He says, if any man in the Night's Watch can make it through the frost fangs alone and afoot, it is you, brother. So he is held in high regard. And he heads off. And we get a brief mention of him a little bit later when John is there with the wildlings and somebody's reporting into Mance Raider and says, oh yeah, and then one of them escaped. He was climbing up the mountain. There's nothing, we couldn't get to him. He was just too good at the climbing thing. And then it goes quiet. We know what happened at the Fist of the First Men is that's when the others attacked and they had to abandon that position. So if he had made it to the Fist of the First Men, then Gerald Mormont would not be there, and he might even find some others there. For the next 3 books, however, he is still included in the appendices of. If you remember, the books have got this massive, it's like 100 pages worth of appendices, and they're mostly characters, who these characters are, and a one-line description of them. And for 3 books, he's kept in as being described as a ranger lost afoot in Skirling Pass, which is interesting because if he disappeared from the narrative, probably experience suggests that the other characters who die or have disappeared or are no longer important, they just don't appear in that massive appendix. So it keeps open the possibility that he is still alive. The issue we've got is that him heading off was over a year ago. And that is more than enough time to get up to the Fist of the First Men, see what's happened. He's a good ranger. He knows he could see the massive tracks everywhere, and then head back down south and get to the wall. He could have climbed the wall because he was an expert climber. He could have gone to Castle Black and come in. He's not been seen. So where is he and what's going on? The boring the answers are very similar to what we have with Benjen, who similarly has disappeared north of the wall. Is that the boring answer is he could be dead. He could have just died, been killed by the others. Maybe he's going to come back as an ice white. We don't know. I suspect not, but we have to say that that's what most people in world would probably think has happened to him. But if anyone could make it through, he could. So, given the fact he has had time to get up there and back, if he is still alive, he must be doing something else. Which makes me wonder whether he, while he's doing this, finds some signs from, say, Benjen saying, I'm heading this way. And he knows one of the reasons why that great ranging was heading north of the wall was to find clues of what happened to Benjen. Another one is what on earth is going on with the wildlings, and still another one to try and figure out what on earth is going on with the others and the like. So perhaps he's got caught up in the Benjen subplot. in the absence of any evidence, and we literally have no evidence on this, I am choosing to believe he's still alive and he's found Benjen, but we have no evidence. Right, I think I've got a couple of questions in the chat. Carlos Bellarina, what battles do you think they'll combine or skip? This, I'm assuming this is a House of the Dragon question. So they've already combined a couple, Battle of the Red Fork and the Fish Feed. They largely happened off screen, but they sort of merged them. I didn't mind that too much because they were connected battles. I think they will keep the set piece events like the Battle of the God's Eye. I think Tumbleton, whether they sort of make it just all into one thing, that's possible. Tumbleton 1 and Tumbleton 2, maybe. But again, I think it's sort of a false dichotomy trying to say that they're very different. It was just a very long, drawn-out horror show there. I think a few of the battles that happen in the Riverlands, they can probably skip. And I think that they will also skip a bit about the battles that happen sort of at the end. So we get, when we're heading towards the Hour of the Wolf, we get a whole series of battles. We get the lads forming, we get the Baratheons coming out. There's a lot of battles that happen in and around there as the war is kind of starting to wind up. Those are the things that I think that they will want their focus to be on the narrative with their main characters. So what happens with Daemon, and primarily what happens with Rhaenyra and Alicent. And I think that they will see it as less worth focusing on the kind of the small battles for control of King's Landing, given that they're going to be ending it in the not too distant future. So there's a lot of battles that they kind of might decide to just push past. Jacob Major, has there ever been an example of a Valyrian weapon breaking if one shoved ice in between oily black stone and stepped up onto it? What do you think would happen? Bend and then snap back, shatter, or hold the giant? I don't think this is one for the chat, because this is one of those things where it's always hard to say this has never happened anywhere in the world of Ice and Fire. It's possible that we get that there's a small reference somewhere that I can't remember off the top of my head, but the short answer is generally no. This is much stronger than Valyrian steel. It is than normal steel. It is magical, but it's clear that although it is magical, it is still a physical sword. And what I mean by that is that it can be theoretically reforged. Tormont does it in King's Landing when he's taking ice and he's reforging that into 2 smaller weapons for House Lannister. So given the fact that that means that we know that you can break it apart with huge heat, then certainly Dragonfire could do it. Could just pure physical strength or weight do it? I see no reason why not. But George R. R. Martin likes this. It's the boring answer, but it's the truthful one. George R. R. Martin likes there to be an element of uncertainty to do with all of his magic. He's not going to tell us the exact breaking point of Valyrian steel, because if he ever wants to use that, then he will want it to be a surprise because we don't know. If we have in the back of our minds, we know that this amount of pressure would break Valyrian steel, then we're automatically making a calculation whether anything that happens with Valyrian steel is enough to break it or not. So he's going to keep it slightly vague so that if he ever needs to, he can surprise us with it. And Vogus, do you think there's any villain who not only survives but also doesn't meet any justice and ends up in a better place than they were before? In A Song of Ice and Fire, I'm going to interpret this as being. I think this depends on what you count as a villain. Are there any who will end up in better places than before? We don't know. I mean, it really depends on what you count as a villain on this one. Um, uh, I think that the real antagonists will have gone. So I think that Euron will have gone by the end of this story, for example. And the others will be gone by the end of this story. So I think that the sort of the real big bad guys, the Bruce Bolton will be gone. Uh, Joffrey's already gone. I think Ramsay Bolton's going to go. So I think the big evil characters will all go. I think I had something else. Martin S in the chat saying, when Otto asked that Daemon carry out his decapitation, was it one last insult to Rhaenyra, or did he literally mean what he said? That he just did not want the indignity of being hacked at? I think it's a number of things. So if he was going to die, and I think he accepted that he was going to die, then yeah, he would much rather Daemon do it over and done with. I can certainly imagine that that's there, but it does. I might be reading too much into it. It does kind of feel to me when I watch that it's almost like he's trying to goad her and put her into this awkward position, because if she lets him do it, then she's going to diminish herself in the eyes of those watching. Daemon seems to instinctively understand this, which is why he hands her the sword. But if she does it, then he knows that she has had a little bit of training in fighting and using a sword, but not huge amounts. So there's a fair chance that she would do exactly what she did. And that would also diminish her a little bit in the eyes of those watching. So him pushing for Rhaenyra to do it actually is a win-win situation for him. He's a player of the game to the very end, because if he says, "I'll let Daemon do it," and she does let Daemon do it, then she looks weak. If he says, "I'll let Daemon do it because you'll mess this up," and she does mess it up, then she looks weak. The only way that she doesn't look weak is if she takes a sword and cuts his head off cleanly, which he probably estimated rightly that she wouldn't be able to do. Um, got another question in the chat. I think that's me all caught up. Brian Velko saying Rhaenyra was better at beheading than Theon Greyjoy with Sir Roderick Castle in Game of Thrones season 2. It's true. It's true. Question from Flame G saying, "Hello, Robert. I hope you're doing well." I am, thank you. I have a question about the stage play. I've been looking to buy tickets, but I was wondering if you have any idea how bad is the view from the restricted view sections. I've never been there before, and online doesn't provide a good view of the venue inside. Normal tickets are a bit pricey. Want to see it live. Well, I can give you the best description that I have. I mean, I've been to that theatre. It's the Royal Shakespeare Theatre in Stratford upon Avon. Been there quite a few times. The the restricted views are, and if you look at the plan of where the restricted views are, this is my public service announcement. They're restricted for two reasons. The main reason, for normal set layouts, this isn't a normal set layout. I'll get onto that in a second. The normal reason is that there are a couple of big pillars, basically, and a restricted view puts you either behind or just to one side of the pillar. Now, I have been sat in a restricted view before, and it's kind of like, as long as you don't mind sort of doing a little bit, just to sort of make sure you can see, then you can still see stuff. There isn't one that's like literally just you're sat behind the pillar and you can't see anything. It is restricted, but you still get a view. So that's what that is. And you should, if you look at the kind of the plan, you can see there's a few kind of strips of ones where it's like behind where the pillar would be. But the way they've set up the stage is different this time around. So it's like the stage is not just, if you imagine like a theatre, not just like the front bit there. It's like in a big cross. And what that means is, and the bits of stage go, as far as I can tell, obviously they've not actually built the thing yet, but as far as I can tell, the sort of the cross-section bit goes right the way to the edges of the theatre, which means that if they are using all of the stage, which they almost certainly will be, particularly if they're going to be having jousts, fingers crossed, and I think that they will, then that means that there will be times when there are actors at the far ends of that cross piece, if that makes sense. And if you're above that in the circle or the upper circle, you could, changing hands, you could see down to that side of it, but you couldn't see down to that bit just below you, if that makes sense. So there are two types of restrictive view. One of them is you might have to sort of like move your head a little bit to see around one of the big pillars, or because of the way they've done the stage, you would be able to see, I don't know, 80-90% of the stage, but you might not see some of the stuff that's just underneath you. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope you should, when you look at if you go onto the RSC website, they've shown where the restricted view seats are for that performance, and it should be reasonably apparent which is which. But if you can afford it, it would be great to go. Ballerina picking up question for Derry's read it before. I love it when people do this. Thank you so much. Saying, I'd like to know what your thoughts are on the show's take on the Green Men. Right, yeah, I did a video on the Green Men, which you will, when did that go out? Tuesday, maybe? I can't remember. So relatively recently. And so that was mostly focused in on the book version of the Green Men. But obviously, the big thing we've had now is the fact that we've seen the Green Men. Season 2, we saw a Green Man very briefly next to the weirwood tree in Harrenhal, in the dark from a long way away. The only reason why we were pretty sure it was a Green Man was we saw some horns, antlers, but this time in episode 2 of the third season, we see one in daylight and quite close. Now, the description here that I would give is goat-like legs, hairy, thick brow, and antlers, and therefore humanoid, but not a human. So this is interesting because one of the big things that we didn't know about the Green Men before is what they were. Were they a distinct race, or were they just children of the forest, or humans? But they look a bit fawn-like. Is the closest I would say. Um, a slightly more muscly version of Mr. Tumnus. That's the kind of feel that we've got going on here. So, what do I think about them? So physically, yeah, they look good. I can be on board with that. I have literally no idea the extent to which that might have come from George R. R. Martin. He wasn't at all involved in season 3. Season 2, he was involved, but more as a sort of an increasingly distant consultant. So we don't know but he was there all the way through development, and he may well have said stuff. So maybe this comes from him. Maybe it doesn't. We simply do not know. What did I make of it? So yeah, I'm quite happy sort of with just the design there. In terms of what they're doing, so the first one was on the Isle of was on in Harrenhal, and I thought, oh, that's quite cool. But at the same time, it kind of diminished them a little bit, this idea that they weren't just on the Isle of Faces, because their role is to protect the Isle of Faces. And then I still haven't got a firm answer on this. It has to be said. Whether that scene in episode 2 was them on the Isle of Faces or just on the shore of the lake, of the God's Eye Lake, because I had initially thought they were on the Isle of Faces, but then when I looked at it, the sort of establishing shot, it looked like actually they were on the shore. If they were on the shore, then that's the second time that a green man has not been there on the island, but has been elsewhere, which I'm not as a huge fan of. Also, this idea that the green man would just sort of stand there on the horizon, look down, make sure everyone saw him, and then go away. It didn't feel as quite as subtle as the Green Men have been through history, because the whole point about the Green Men is we don't know what they look like because people haven't seen them. So for normal people to have seen them twice in 2 seasons stretches it a little bit for me. Martin S. Is Rhaenyra Targaryen at least better with the sword than Littlefinger, or about equal? I mean, it's a hard one to say. So Littlefinger didn't use the sword much. He did once, that we know of, when he was young, in a fight with Brandon Stark, Ned's brother, which he lost very easily. But since then, he's not really used it, and you don't get the impression he's practiced all that much. Rhaenyra always wanted to use it. We see at least one scene where she kind of picks up a sword and does a little bit of the practice stuff. So, I mean, it's hard to say. Different characters in different times and places. In terms of technical skills, I suspect Rhaenyra probably is better. Derry's read it before, saying I'm happy for the show to give me their idea on the Green Men. I don't know what I'm going to uh, squash it in next to the actual Song of Ice and Fire lore. Yeah. Um, if it comes out, and I think we will see the Green Men in the books. If it comes out, they're completely different. I'll be okay with that too. Right. Andrew K saying, hoping that was not the Isle of Faces. It was not a fitting reveal for such an iconic location. Yeah, I'm erring to the idea it wasn't the Isle of Faces. But this does, I mean, I think one of the things that I quite like about, I didn't like those scenes particularly, but one of the things I did quite like was it did give us a reason for Adam to visit the Isle of Faces later, because we're told he did in Fire and Blood. He flies out to there, lands on the Isle of Faces, consults with the Green Men, and then heads off down to Tumbleton after gathering a sort of an army. But we're not told any more than that, and he tragically dies quite soon after, so we don't know. But it's always a little bit of a mystery because there's nothing in his past that we know of that particularly links him to the old gods or weirwood trees or the children of the forest or anything like that. He comes from a sailing life, from Hull. Hull is where they build the ships on Driftmark. They're not, as far as we can tell, worshipping the old gods there. So it's always been a little bit of a mystery, and this sort of gives a reason why. Maybe he's seeking knowledge or something, and he knows that there's a witch there. Who knows? Let's go to question from where we at. Flame G, the restrictive view, did that one already. AD Ross saying, greetings, Sir Robert, and to you. Hope you and Dan are well, enjoying the more normal temperatures in the UK. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to get hot again next week, but this has been a nice bit of a respite from that. With House of the Dragon back on our screens, I've been indulging in idle speculation about how Westeros might have developed had the dance been averted. Already, dragon riding had spread to another family, with the Velaryons having 3 dragons, and they would likely have added more, with Rhaenyra's children with Laenor and Daemon's children with Laena. The High Towers were soon likely to be added to the list. With each additional marriage to the Targaryens by the great houses, the pool would have expanded and then spread through the generations out to lesser families. Do you believe a situation could have developed where Westeros became a continent of dragon-riding families, with ever-increasing numbers of dragons and more potential riders with Targaryen ancestry? Or do you think averting the dance would merely have delayed the inevitable? I mean, it's an interesting question. I think that the starting point has to be that dragons were being born at an increasing rate, just naturally. We spend a lot of time later in the Targaryen ruling years with all of these people saying, how do I hatch dragon egg? Do I need to do that? Do I need some magic? Do I need fire and blood? What about a red comet? And they're just trying to work out what's the formula for making these eggs hatch. Back at this moment in time, in the build up to the Dance of the Dragons, there was no formula. Dragon eggs just hatched like normal eggs, just hatch. So that was happening at an increasing rate. And the more dragons you have, the more eggs they have, and the whole thing would be increasing exponentially. And you're right, if nothing changed in that, it would kind of make sense that we've already had the Targaryens, and you're right, the Velaryons married in, and now they're dragon riding. And then we get the High Towers, the Baratheons intermarry with the Targaryens on a regular basis. And let's say, I mean, it happened at the outbreak of the dance, but it's a sensible match anyway. Aemond was betrothed to a Baratheon daughter. Surely he would have wanted his children to be dragon riders. So yes, the potential was there for it to just expand and expand and expand. I think that at some point, though, the Targaryens would realize this is now suddenly not in their best interests as a family, because as a family they had and kept hold of power because they were the family with dragons. And if lots of families have dragons, then you get an issue. So I think even if the dance hadn't happened, at some point, the Targaryens would have done some kind of egg management. So how that works, I don't know. But somebody within the Targaryens will have said, "This isn't going to help us. This is going to be undermining our ability to rule and scare people with all of our dragons." Added to which, there were people who wanted the dragons to die, who did not want dragons to be taken over the world, like the Maesters, for example. So would they have done something? Feels entirely possible. So yes, I think the theory is, if the dance hadn't happened, then the amount of dragons, the amount of dragon eggs, the amount of dragon riding families would just keep on increasing. The reality is there would be some natural breaks on the system. If not a civil war, then the Maesters moving against them, or the Targaryens limiting who can have access to their eggs. Question from Maester Dave. Salutations, Robert. I have 2 questions. First, why was Bloodraven allowed to have Dark Sister as a bastard? Why not Baelor or Maekar? Second, Lady Catelyn mentions her dreams being dark and full of terrors when Riverrun is awoken after the Karstarks killed the Lannister prisoners. Could we see Lady Stoneheart become more of an instrument of her law? Well, let's do the first bit. Why did Bloodraven get Dark Sister? So there were 2 Targaryen Valyrian steel swords. Blackfire, the Sword of Kings. Dark Sister, not quite the Sword of Queens, but like it went often to an incredibly trusted member of the family. Visenya had Dark Sister. Aemon the Dragon Knight had Dark Sister, and so on. Why did it end up with Bloodraven? Well, Aemon the Dragon Knight obviously was around just before then. He was the last known user of it. So it's a matter of, after he died, it presumably reverted back to the king, and the king could then decide who gets it after that. However, Aegon IV did a couple of things. Firstly, he gave Blackfire to a bastard son of his, Daemon Blackfire. And secondly, he legitimized all of his bastard children. So they were all potentially in line to the throne. They all could call themselves Targaryen if they wanted to. And we read this, actually, for how Daeron II, the Good, when he took over, and after Aegon IV's indulgences, and legitimizing all of these bastards, Daemon had to figure out how to manage that. And this is what we read. Daemon did not stop there, however, in his efforts to improve those things that his father had corrupted or had left to rot through malign neglect. He was conscientious in his duties to the realm and sought to stabilize it in the wake of Aegon's deathbed decree, which legitimized all of his bastard half-siblings. Although he could not and would not rescind his father's last wishes, he did what he could to keep the great bastards close, treating them honourably and continuing the incomes that the king had bestowed on them. He paid the dowry that Aegon had promised to the Archon of Tyrosh, thereby seeing his half-brother Daemon Blackfire wed to Rohan of Tyrosh, for all that Sir Daemon was only 14. On their wedding day, he granted Daemon a tract of land near the Blackwater with the right to raise a castle. Some say he did such things to assert his rule and legitimacy over the great bastards, and others because he was kind and just. But whatever the truth, such efforts sadly proved in vain. So from that quote, the key thing is the court, not the realm as a whole, but the court itself is in a bit of chaos after Aegon IV died. He suddenly created a whole series of very powerful new members of the family. And they will start to coalesce around Daemon Blackfyre as the alternative to Daeron himself as king. So what does Daeron do? Well, first of all, it appears he doesn't want to alienate anyone, so he'll allow them to remain at court. He'll allow that marriage to go ahead. He won't undo the legitimizations. That would just really annoy them. So he goes on this kind of big appeasing mission, but he will be very aware of the fact that he needs allies against these people who are starting to coalesce around Daemon Blackfyre. The most loyal and anti-Daemon or anti-Aegor Rivers, Bittersteel, Targaryen was Bloodraven. So it kind of makes sense. If you're giving Dark Sister to your most loyal lieutenant, the person who is definitely going to be on your side, then that makes absolute sense. It's not just about who is the greatest warrior. In fact, Dark Sister is a sword which was sort of weighted and sized, it would appear, for a woman, because Visenya used it, and therefore it's not like this massive. You mentioned Maekar in your question. Maekar favoured like big hammers and morning stars and things like that. Very different style of fighting to this smaller sword. So I think when you start digging into the political context at the time, the idea that he would give this person who was an uber loyalist Dark Sister to kind of balance the Valyrian steel sword that Daemon Blackfyre had, I think that makes perfect sense. Let's go to Yeldenil. No, actually, there was a second question you had, didn't you? Which was about Catelyn Stark. So if you imagine the scene at River Run and the Lannister prisoners have been killed by the Carstarks. This is kind of like the fracturing of Robb's alliances, and it is a deliberate reaction against her and her actions releasing Jaime Lannister. She should have had troubled sleep. And George R. R. Martin references that by saying that her dreams were dark and full of terrors. Or laced with terrors, I think it actually says. So what's going on? I mean, we take it at its face value. First of all, yeah, she will have had bad dreams. That's normal and natural. Secondly, I think this is foreshadowing for her being brought back through the power of R'hllor. If you remember, how she came back as Lady Stoneheart, how she came back was that Beric kind of like gave his life essence to her. It's a bit more convoluted than that. But the reason why he was alive is because Thoros of Myr had done the last kiss, basically the last rites on him from R'hllor, and that had brought him back. So the power, whatever it was that was powering Beric, which comes from initially, it would appear, Thoros's magic of R'hllor, that has flowed into Lady Stoneheart. So this, I think, is foreshadowing that. Does it mean that it's also foreshadowing her operating more as an agent of R'hllor? I suspect not. There is within her company a Red Priest who is Thoros of Myr, but Thoros of Myr has made it clear he's not happy with this. He's not happy with the things that she's been doing. So I don't think she is going to be doing the work of R'hllor. I think that she's got her own motivations. She's got very clear, strong motivations about getting revenge on the people who've wronged her family. So yeah, I think it was just a nod to how she would have been brought back. Martin S saying, I am tanking 5-player World of Warcraft dungeons on my Draenei Protection Warrior while I listen to your live stream, but I'm listening with interest. Oh, well, good luck with that. Yeah, it's been a long time since I played World of Warcraft. I've said this before various times, but if I ever get a chance, would you watch me playing video games on this channel, the live streams? Thought it might be a bit of fun. So I do play video games sometimes. I'm not a hardcore gamer, but I do play video games. Just little playthroughs, lore playthroughs, when I'm talking through the lore of stuff. Let me know down in the comments if that's a thing you might enjoy. Let's go to people answering already. Yes, people are saying watch game live streams already would definitely. Well, that's very encouraging. Then maybe I'll do something. Watch this space. I've thought about it, but I've never really found the time to do it. And then I'll have to figure out how to do all of the clever stuff with the audio and anyway, it must be possible. Other people do it. It must be possible. Actually, I got myself a new stream cam. Can you tell the difference in the visuals? I think I can at this end. Let me know if you can. Next up, we're going to be improving the audio. I promise that's the next thing we are going to be trying to do on this. James Boros saying, what do you make of your lot's chances against Mexico at the Azteca? Well, it's not a football stream, so I won't dwell on this. And by the time a lot of people watch this, that game will already have happened. So I'm very open to egg on my face on this one. Very briefly, obviously the altitude is an issue. Mexico are a good team, but they're not as good as they have been in the past from what I have seen of them. I think this England team are very reliant on our 2 or 3 actually world-class players doing the thing that they do best. You know who they are just as well as I do. So far, they've been dragging the team along. If they turn up again and they get too knackered by the altitude, then I think we'll be fine. If they don't, or they get a bit too tired, then we're going to have issues. So yeah, I've from what I've seen from Gilberto Maura, if that's how you pronounce his name, he looks very useful. So I'm going to keep an eye out for him. Anyway, not a football stream. And it's happening at 1 a.m. my time. That's not good. Carl Parsnark saying, Ranger Robert plays Skyrim and narrates in real time. I was wondering about Skyrim, just as a thing. Anyway, where are we at? Yeldenil, I hope you and Dan are well. Thank you. We are. I have a Song of Ice and Fire magic theory question for you. Fire, various sorts of flames, seem to share a potential for magical communication. Melisandre's or Thoros's visions in ordinary flames, glass candles, the voice in the blue flames that Varys heard. Then there's wildfire. Of course, we hear mostly of its destructive potential, but do you think it could be used for magical messaging as well? Or would the fact that it seems more alchemy and sciencey magic rule that out? And what about dragonfire? So, yeah, I mean, this is an interesting observation about fire being used as a way to communicate, or even if it's one-way communication. So the seeing the visions in the flames is not like communicating with another person unless you think that is the god communicating with you. But yes, more often than any other kind of magic type, we are seeing that flames are a means through which you can communicate. So could you do that through wildfire? Well, I think the important point here is that the flames themselves are not magic. So Melisandre does not create a magic fire, stare into it, and then that shows her visions. She just creates a fire. So I don't think it's the fire itself that is particularly magical, but the fire allows the magic or the communication to go through it. So if that is the case, then a wildfire thing, why not? Or even dragonfire. This is the kind of thing where I'm convinced that in the next book we will get bits of magic that make us go, whoa, I didn't know you could do that. Because that has happened in every book so far. When we get shadow babies seeing visions in the flames, when you get people being brought back to life, when you get the true visions of the future, all the different kinds of magic that we see in A Song of Ice and Fire, we didn't know beforehand that that was even possible. So I think what we're going to find is that we're going to be surprised by the magic someone does. Maybe that could be seeing visions through either dragonfire or wildfire. George R. Martin, very relaxed about his very low detail form of the magic system. He's not going to tell us because he thinks it ruins this. Let's have a quick flick through the chat. Some people saying some nice things about the gaming idea. So yeah, maybe we'll do that. James Boros saying a game that would be excellent and with a grim fantasy lean would be Claire Obscura Expedition 33. I'd join Patreon for that. Well, I've heard good things about that actually. I was thinking. Don't want to get too distracted by this, but I was thinking that there were two sort of things. Firstly, where there are video games that are linked into the lore of the worlds that I cover. So, for example, there's fantastic Telltale games, a Game of Thrones game, maybe like the Shadow of War, Lord of the Rings games, definitely the Witcher games, those kinds of things. I can do a lore playthrough with the idea that, yes, I'm playing through the game, but as we're coming to various bits of this world, I can explain the lore of it as we're going along. And that's the focus, a lore playthrough, rather than I'm trying to 100% it or whatever. So that's the first thing. The second thing is just hanging out playing something like Skyrim, which I've played Skyrim for years, so I probably know the game better than I know most other games, and it might just be fun hanging out and chatting through stuff. Anyway, Jess Holgerson saying Wild Hunt is a must. Yeah, that's Witcher 3, and there's going to be a new mod on that, or expansion, I think, really, rather than the mod, a new expansion coming out for that soon, which might be a reason to do it. Anyway, let's go to Euron and his apotheosis. Somebody said, just as an idea of another thing, a bit of magic's going on. Yeah, so what's happening next book? Euron will be doing some crazy thing. Wow, I didn't know that you could. Well, we're all speculating. Yeah, bring krakens up from the deep. So that kind of thing. I suspect he's got some more things up his sleeve. Let's go to Martin S. saying, "Hello, Robert. I was thinking about the Master of Laws, Lord Jasper Wilde, in the latest episode of House of the Dragon. As I understand it, he held the same position in the book. He did, although he didn't try to assault Alison Hightower there. Anyway, I think his role is structurally somewhat similar to Eddard Stark's in King's Landing, structurally, not morally. He doesn't seem to be anywhere near as good a person as Ned. In both cases, they had the law, in inverted commas, on their side, while the City Watch sided with the opposing faction. It's an interesting contrast between law, or at least the claim of legality, and brute force. What struck me is that the moral quality of the law doesn't actually change the structural point. Ned's cause was far more just than Jasper's, but both illustrate the same reality. Law by itself loses to organized force when the people meant to enforce it choose the other side. So, yeah, I agree completely on this. That last point you're making. I think the other sort of nuance I would add into this is that when you are the lawmakers, not just the law enforcers like the gold cloaks, but when you're the lawmakers, it actually gets a whole lot fuzzier about what the law is, as in what is the lawful thing to do. It's not just that the law enforcers, the gold cloaks, are there to be choosing whether they're on the right side or the wrong side. We may have strong views on who out of Rhaenyra and Aegon was the rightful ruler and should have taken over after Viserys. And I'm sure you know the vast majority of fans of A Song of Ice and Fire are very much Team Black and this Team Rhaenyra. But you can argue the lawful side the other way around. You can argue that it didn't actually matter who the king wanted as their heir. The laws of succession state that historically it has always happened this way, that it's the son, the eldest son, who inherits. Aegon I was the king. He wasn't the oldest. Visenya was the oldest, but she wasn't in charge. He was. So you can argue a point from both Westerosi legal precedent and also Targaryen legal precedent that Aegon should have inherited. But as I say, if you're a lawmaker, if the king has absolute power, then the king can decide whatever they want. And they say, well, actually, I want that person to be my heir. So it's not just about the law enforcers, it's about the law makers. And the law enforcers bit comes in when it's about how does that decision get enforced, because the goal, there's an understanding, I think, on every side that you need the gold cloaks in order to be making sure that your understanding of events is right. And so your point characterizing it, but if the gold cloaks had been on Ned's side, then he perhaps would have prevailed. And so it's more about who's got the strength rather than who's in the moral right. Kalnitsky saying Robert's beard is okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. I assume there's some context to that, but it needs doing a little bit of a trim. It wasn't particularly even trim I gave it last time, but I will do that. Joe Padge just stopping by to give a like and a thank you. Great to see you. Let's go to, we've got some Lord of the Rings questions now. Do feel free to keep on dropping in questions about Song of Ice and Fire, House of the Dragon. I will answer them as well as we are going through. But Lord of the Rings, Nathan saying, hi Robert, hope you're well. I am, thank you. Lord of the Rings question, do you think Aragorn would have sought counsel from the members of the White Council who were still present at his coronation and wedding regarding the post-War of the Ring decisions he went on to make. Aragorn never strikes me as the sort of person who would disregard the wisdom of Gandalf, Elrond, or Galadriel, and I imagine they would have at least discussed the future of Middle-earth before they departed. How much influence do you think they had on his plans for rebuilding the kingdom and shaping the early Fourth Age? It's an interesting question. So I would agree that Aragorn was humble enough to take advice from people, particularly wise and learned and good people like Galadriel, Elrond, Gandalf. And I have no doubt that he did take their advice while they were still there. The bigger picture, though, is that they were going, as were the elves as a whole, and the dwarves were going to be digging deeper underground. The orcs were going to be wiped out. This was the dominion of man, the Fourth Age. This was when humanity was ruling. And it's slightly undercut a couple of times in the films, but this is part of what undermined in the films. This is part of what was being shown through the War of the Ring. This was the time for humanity to step up. Previously facing Sauron, then humanity, humans and elves fought together, the last alliance of elves and men at the end of the Second Age. This time, the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, there was a couple of half-elves, one elf, and that's it. It was mostly humans. So that was humans stepping up, and they didn't need the others to be doing their thing. So, and I suspect that Elrond, Galadriel, and Gandalf were wise enough themselves to take that step back, to allow Aragorn to be the leader and to not be seen to be leaning on them. So I think that's the sort of the headline. But how they advised tended to be increasingly, it wasn't just like sitting over his shoulder saying, now do this, now do that, now do that. Gandalf took a step back and allowed Aragorn to lead, and he would advise. The Elrond did advise, Galadriel did advise, but they didn't come along with them. Elrond sent a few bits of advice with his sons, Elladan and Elrohir. So he sent advice like, don't forget about the paths of the dead, which is like Aragorn, little nudge in that direction. But it wasn't, you have to go and do this now. So yes, he would have taken advice, I'm sure, but not taken their lead. Corey Wessendorf, do you think Bilbo's urgency to leave the Shire was due to the One Ring influencing him to go? Sauron was building power. Bilbo was constantly fiddling with the ring in his pocket during the speech. Was the ring wanting Bilbo to leave, knowing his master was back and hoping Bilbo would get captured on the road by the Nazgul who were heading to the Shire? I mean, this is a really interesting question. The Nazgul at that point weren't heading to the Shire. This was so the films collapsed down the time frame here. There was like a 17-year gap in the books from the long expected party until the point at which Frodo's about to leave. So that was a big gap. That's when the hunt for Gollum happens, incidentally. And filming for that, I think, is starting this month. So it wasn't the urgency because, there's some Nazgul coming, I hope he falls afoul of them. But the ring was definitely trying to get back to Sauron. That bit, I think, is beyond dispute. And so when Bilbo was thinking he was feeling stretched, butter spread over too much bread, etc., all of that kind of stuff, then the ring would also have been pushing him in that direction to be leaving. Bilbo's big decision, obviously, was to leave the ring. What I find most instructive, though, is that once he does give up the ring and he heads out, it's like this weight lifts off of him. He starts singing. He starts singing his traveling song. The road goes over on and on, and he doesn't suddenly go, "Oh, actually, shall I stay here?" He's made up his mind to go, and he wants to go of his own volition, and it's not just the ring pushing him because he's left the ring behind. So I think it's a really interesting idea, and I think probably pushing him towards the idea, yes, but not in control of him, and it wasn't all of his, all of the ring pushing. Bilbo did want to go. Skagzilla saying, "Hello, Robert. If you had to be a minor character in the Lord of the Rings movies, who would you choose?" My friends decided I'm Odo Proudfoot, Proudfeet, which I'm thrilled with. My first thought for you was the archivist who shows Gandalf the Minas Tirith Library. I think it's fitting as you guide us through Tolkien and Martin's vast universes. I'd love to think who you would be. Well, let me know who you would be in the chat. I did have a think about this. I like the idea of being the archivist. I think that's really nice. I do have to admit, I love the idea though of just being like one of the patrons at the Prancing Pony, who's just there. They're having a fun time. They're having a couple of drinks. They're chatting. They're singing. A few kind of weird and scary things happen, but they're doing all right. I've always loved the Prancing Pony. I think Bielemeier is one of the most underrated, wonderful characters in the whole story. So yeah, I think that's probably where I would find myself. Ginty, oh, my last question from my patrons. So now's a good time. If you do have any more questions, now is a good time to drop your questions into the chat. I'll try and pick up as many of these as I can. Ginty M, happy Thursday to you, Robert, and to Dan the dog. At the Council of Elrond, Boromir mentions that smoke is rising from Mount Doom again. Was it dormant while Sauron was rebuilding his strength? Or is it that his forge there was left unused until he was crafting for the war he was about to loose on Middle-earth? Continuing to adore listening to the Andy Serkis audiobook. Yeah, so this, I think last week you mentioned you were doing... I've also been listening to the Andy Serkis narration of Fellowship of the Ring. I'm currently actually I was talking about the Prancing Pony. Perhaps this is why I was thinking about it. They're at the Prancing Pony now, so let's see how far they get by next week. But it is very good, and he's actually. I was wondering whether I might think it sort of overacted, but he does have a great amount of kind of control of different voices for different characters, and in a like when he does the Barrow White voice, is just like completely different voice to his normal voice. Excellent stuff. But that wasn't your question. The question is about Mount Doom and the smoke is rising. So yeah, Boromir mentions this, that smoke is rising once more from Mount Doom. As far as we can tell, it was dormant, as it were, while Sauron was not there. When he returned, that's when the smoke started billowing. So why is that? Well, perhaps it is his forge, so perhaps he's just doing some forging, or perhaps he's there. It does. We're not going all rings of power with this, but having the cloud cover over Mordor is good for his troops. They don't like the light, but it's also a symbol of him being there. And Mount Doom, I did a video on this. Mount Doom is a magical. It's the only volcano that we know of in Middle-earth. Random fact. There may well be others off the map that we don't know about. There's a couple of places that we're pretty sure are extinct volcanoes or very dormant volcanoes. But in terms of an active volcano, this is the only one we read about. But we also know it was made by Morgoth. And there is some element of his magic within that. So, as Sauron has been using it, there is this connection going on there. I wouldn't want to put it much more strongly, but it's the fires and the smoke have been happening while he was there, partly smithing, partly cloud cover for his troops, and partly just announcing his presence, perhaps even subconsciously. I think I had another. Another quick. Oh, Jule Elson gifted 1 IDG Live membership. Yeah, you can do this. Thank you very much. That's very generous of you, gifting an IDG Live membership here. If you remember on the channel, then your name gets highlighted, and I get to see when I'm flicking through. Right, let's have a very quick look at the chat. Geeb saying, I'd watch Robert play through Lego Lord of the Rings all day. I have played through Lego Lord of the Rings all day. It's a fun game. And maybe that's it. Let's have a... yeah, okay, let's see. What have I got coming out this week? I've got... I've not forgotten my video series on Aegon's Conquest. I've got some of them coming up. A reminder, if you would be interested in the video game playthroughs, let me know down there. I'm doing, in case you've missed it on this channel, after the episodes of House Dragon air, when that's finished, within a few minutes, my instant reaction, I'm calling it my instant reaction, it's a pre-recorded reaction, but it's like a sort of a long form, less scripted version of the breakdowns that I do on the main channel, and a few extra things that I've thought of, I'll just throw in there as well. So after you watch it live, if you watch it live, then come onto this channel and you can get my breakdowns there. But other than that, I'll be back this time next week with another live stream appearing somewhere around here. Links to other streams that I have done appearing somewhere around here is a link to my Patreon page. Patreon is the best way to support this channel if you wish to do so, in which case, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And that is all for this time. I will see you again next week. Take care.